Welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. And if you'd like to contact us with suggestions or comments, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. You can check out the website, jewishsacredaging.com. Visit the Facebook page, Jewish Sacred Aging on Facebook. You know the drill. And if not, ask a grandchild or a 12-year-old, and they can figure everything out real quick. Or in this day and age, ask AI. They seem to know everything that we don't know. We're very, very pleased to welcome to today's Seekers of Meaning my colleague, Rabbi Josh Franklin, who is the author of a very, very exciting new book called Where Are You?, subtitled Finding Yourself in the Bible, recently published by, and I can never pronounce this publisher's name,
Whipfenstock.
Whipfenstock?
Yeah, with a little F at the end of that P. Whipfenstock.
Wow, they're out on the West Coast, that figures. Anyway, Josh, it's good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you too, Rabbi Address.
Rabbi,
Richie, however you want to be called.
No, seriously, we
well, sometimes I think of you as my rabbi, so,
thank
rabbi is appropriate.
I put on my rabbi's voice for that. But anyway, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Where'd the idea come from?
A long time ago, I was reading this great book, one of my favorite books by Martin Buber called The Way of Man.
Yeah.
It's essentially 5 different stories that are parables in Hasidic lore. And each of them he extrapolates into these great teaching lectures. And one of them just really struck me and had made me think about this one story for years. And it becomes one of the bases of the book. It's a story about a chief of police who wanders into a prison cell of a famous rabbi. And the chief of police, as in these tales, is kind of this foil trying to trick the rabbi, trying to trip him up on biblical stuff. And he says to the rabbi, tell me, in the story of the Garden of Eden, when God asks Adam, where are you? Doesn't he already know the answer to the question? What kind of omniscient God is that? And the rabbi responds something to the effect of, it's not where you are in the world, it's where you are in your world. The story takes a little bit of a turn there, but the idea of where you are in your world, seeing our location more than just simply geographic coordinates on a map or where we are physically, I like to call it your lifescape rather than your landscape, is one of these ideas that's always just fascinated me. And through that paradigm, over the years as I've been teaching, I've seen it play out in place after place. And slowly but surely, this book was brewing in my head of all these different places that are more than just the landscape of the Bible, more than just the geography of the Bible, but the metaphysical geography of the Bible, something that's really spiritual and special.
If not the great spiritual question. And it's great that it comes right at the beginning of Tanakh, the image of the garden. But you play around with this image of the garden a lot. And I have a note here I really wanted to ask you about, to walk me through your fascination with the garden and the Hebrew of Eden.
Yeah, there are certain words and certain paradigms or texts in the Bible that I think play out over and over again. They're core texts that essentially other texts throughout the Bible are referring to. And Eden, especially the creation narrative, is really one of those texts in which language as well as this thematics we see over and over again. I'll start with the idea that people had a real fascination over the last couple hundred years with finding the Garden of Eden, literally. And even Christopher Columbus thought that he had found the Garden of Eden in Venezuela and wrote about it. There are other people who thought that the Garden of Eden was on the North Pole. And this over fascination with discovery and finding the literal place of the Garden of Eden has really, made me laugh almost, because I don't think that the garden is really about where you are on a map.
Right.
The crazy thing is that the text gives us some major clues, but the clues really lead you to nowhere. The clues are essentially the Garden of Eden's at the intersection of 4 different rivers. The Tigris and the Euphrates, great, we know that one. One is probably the Nile, and another one actually circles the area of Cush, which is Ethiopia. And so you think, okay, a river issues from Eden. So all we got to do is find the intersection of these four rivers and we find the Garden of Eden, except for the fact that there's really no intersection of
Right.
these
It's a big
four.
garden, very big
Yeah.
garden.
And you realize that it's not talking about a place that you can literally find on a map, but it's got to be a different kind of topography altogether. There's a term that I really like. The term is utopos or utopia. And it doesn't mean that it is imaginary. It means that it is nowhere. That's what utopos means or utopia means. And the idea is that it's nowhere physically, but somewhere very real in our lives. And Eden gives us a little bit of a hint. Even the name means delight. And when you really unpack life experiences where you have these heightened emotional states of consciousness that you're living in a sacred moment in your life, a moment of pure joy, I really think you are not metaphorically experiencing Eden. You're metaphysically experiencing Eden, a very real experience where you get to taste the garden.
So we can get back to the garden.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've been in the garden in many places in my life. You can't dwell in the garden. You can't live there permanently. I don't think that's really possible. I think we get glimpses of the garden throughout our lives. Some people describe it when they're getting married and they're standing under the chuppah and there's this feeling of just utter euphoria that's going on, spiritual euphoria. Some people describe it when they have their first kid. I have this vivid memory of Rabbi David Allenson, alav shalom, ordaining me as a rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in New York City. That moment with his hands upon my head, it just felt holy and sacred, living in a moment that I know I'm never going to forget and a moment of delight. And for me, that was the garden right there in front of Torah, in front of community, in front of people who loved me. That was a garden moment. There's this great text in Genesis where Pharaoh awakes from a very profound series of dreams. And the text uses this language that's a little bit bizarre and hard to translate. And I think it's hard to translate also because we don't really have a word in English. The modern Hebrew actually does pick it up in a fun way. The text goes, Vatipa emrucho. His Yeah, I'm going to give you some other translations. His soul was stirred or his heart was pounding. But that's not really what the word vatipa means. It means something along the lines to verb time, to experience a moment. And so the best I could come up with and really trying to understand this without using conventional English that we have is to invent a word. And I call it momenting. Momenting is where you are conscious of living in a profound spiritual moment as it's happening. And we rarely get those moments in life. Moments that we know will change us profoundly and transform who we are. Pharaoh gets to experience that, but I think we get to experience that in our life as well. In modern Hebrew, if you have your heartbeat, you have your pi'imah. That's partly why the word is going to be so powerful. And also you have this, Rashi says, pa'amonim is related to the word bells, because bells are ringing when you are experiencing one of these moments, metaphorical bells that are alerting you to the fact that you're in a sacred moment. So this idea of verbing time, verbing moments, momenting, if you will, I think is something that we see in our lives and is an indicator that we might be in Eden.
I'm fascinated in the course of the book. You play around with or deconstruct a lot of Hebrew words. You go back to the shorish, the roots, and you play around with them. What drew you to that? What drew you to that fascination with the actual Hebrew language and the roots?
I really do believe that when we read text of Torah, the Hebrew is giving us messaging or connecting in a very spiritual web all throughout the Tanakh. The words are connecting to each other and offer us really glimpses of something larger if we can put together the messaging, if we could understand the Hebrew and see the connections between the text. Perhaps it's that I've always been fascinated by the Hebrew language. Perhaps that one of my teachers, Rabbi Alan Ullman, his style of teaching has always kind of elucidated all of these words to show that they mean more than any given translation that you could come up with actually indicates. But once you begin to see the pattern of these words and the power of these words, you begin to unlock something that's really special within the text, something that I don't think you can always get with the translation. So part of my book is really trying to be able to give more meaning to the text through unpacking these words in a way that a non-native speaker, in a way that someone who just doesn't speak Hebrew at all wouldn't really get. But now I'm going to give them a gateway or a pathway to be able to understand the text on that particular level.
No, that's why I wanted to ask you, because it's fascinating the way you, and I think you mentioned, I think in the introduction that um, you're going to use some of your own translations and understanding of that, which is, but we teach the Torah blessing of la asok b'divrei Torah, the idea that you're just letting the Torah speak to you, and all the translations are commentaries.
Correct.
That's the beauty of studying Torah. So, and speaking of studying Torah, you have this quote that I love to unpack from Menachem of Kotz, a rather famous rabbi. You write, quote, "Why do we mark the giving of Torah but never use the language of receiving the Torah?" And your book, in many ways, is unpacking the receiving of Torah on an individual level. So walk me through that quote from your perspectives, Josh.
Well, one of the things that I think happens quite often is we think that revelation of Torah was an event that happened once upon a time in the past. But I really do believe, and we see it all throughout our liturgy as well, that revelation of Torah is an ongoing process, something that we are receiving very much in our day. It wasn't given, it's giving, or it's receiving, but it's not received or given. And that's really important to understand, especially when we say our Torah blessing before we read the Torah. We say, Notain HaTorah, God, you're giving us Torah. It's an important distinction because it's the idea that, one, the Torah isn't fixed. We continue to unpack it over and over again. One of my favorite quotes from rabbinic literature is this quote from Ben Bagbag, who says, Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba dekula ba. Keep turning it over and over again, for everything is in it. I like to think of the Torah kind of like the geometric shape of a fractal. To quote one of my colleagues, who I think you know, Rabbi Eli Friedman, that's his analogy. He says a fractal has a very defined area, but an infinite perimeter. And that's what Torah really is. We're tracing along the perimeter every time we go into this new level of interpretation of the text, and we try to unpack it beyond where it's already been elucidated, because revelation is completely ongoing. The Torah might be fixed in the number of letters and words that it has, but it's really infinite in the way that we understand it and unpack it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we perhaps don't stress enough in synagogue land, of this continual revelation of Torah. And I know when we talk to classes, what we do in Jewish sacred aging, we try to make sure that in studying the text, this is continuing, that the revelation that you had of this text when you were 20 is very, very different than when you have it at 80. And it's the same word, but can mean a million different things because you've walked the walk for a life and have that experience. But you've taught classes where somebody would say, I never thought about that before I read this text. And because you're not the same person you were last year. That's why we have to redo it again this year.
Yeah.
You have a very interesting section that you talk about fear. I think you reference Haran, and you have this concept of fear aversion. I think I got that right. Fear aversion. And here it is in the middle of a book on Torah and finding oneself in the Torah. And you talk about fear. Now, as we get older, that fear quotient rises because there's a lot more things to be afraid of, including our own death. Could you walk us through a little bit about what you mean by fear aversion within the context of your book? Where are you finding yourself in the Bible? By the way, available at the usual outlets for books?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. It's available directly from the publisher. It's available on Kindle. And in the upcoming months, God willing, I'll finish recording my audiobook version of it.
Very
and
good.
You'll be able to listen to it that way as well.
You know what the next stop is? The film rights.
That would be hard to make a film version of this, but hey, who knows? If someone wants to buy the rights.
Who knows? You could be the casting director. Look.
So
fear of loss aversion. Let's get back to the book and as opposed to the fantasy.
So there is something that social psychologists call primal fears. And primal fears are the basic fundamental fears that we have. And one of the biggest ones is the fear of the unknown. One of the reasons why people fear aging is because they don't understand what's next, or where we're making a big move in life. We have a fear of, what is coming, because it is just at the root of all of our other fears. We fear public speaking because we don't know what's going to happen. We fear death because we don't know what's after this life. And I think when you really come to pivotal transitional moments of life, this fear kicks in more than ever. I talk about Haran being a place that's a crossroads, where you hit this juncture where you need to move forward, but the place that you're in right now, in this in-between spot, is a little bit comfortable. And quite often people have an aversion to taking the next step forward because they don't know what's there. They suffer from the fear of the unknown. By the way, I'll tell you that I'm at one of those juncture spots right now in my own life. I am moving down to Florida, and yeah, I'm excited. That's the question people ask me all the time. Are you excited? Are you excited? I'm like, boy, so much more complicated than that. But yes, excitement is one of those particular things. I'd be crazy if I wasn't harboring a little bit of fear right now in addition to that. It's this amalgam of fear, excitement, nervousness, angst. But fear is certainly a part of any transitional moment in our life. And quite often, it can be a sacred fear. You can harness it in that particular way. By the way, there are different kinds of crazy fears that we experience because of the unknown. One of them, what I described, is called the fear of success, which is a crazy phenomenon where people fear success, quite literally. I think the Lubavitcher Rebbe talked about it in relation to our Parsha this week, in Parshat Shalach Lecha, where he's asked the question, why do these 10 Israelite leaders not want to go into the promised land? They know that God's got their back. And he essentially says, with going to the promised land and being successful there, your whole entire life and existence changes. And yes, probably l'tovah, probably for the better, but people don't like change. And they're so willing to avert change that they're actually going to stay in a place that's not quite as good for them because they fear what's next. They fear what's new. And that's a crazy concept.
The whole image of the wilderness, how many times in the course of the Tanakh, we should have stayed in Egypt.
Yeah.
At least we knew where our meals were coming from. Now we're out here in the wilderness, the great metaphor for our own life, and we are sometimes lost. Better we should have stayed. The devil we know,
is always better than the devil we don't.
The metaphors that are encapsulated within the text are just phenomenal and very real because everybody lives them. Everybody lives them.
Yeah, this isn't a book that might reach a certain part of your life, but not others. I think really every chapter speaks to a different part of life that we cycle through. And yeah, there are some tough moments that we explore in the book as well. So for example, Mitzrayim, what it's like to be in the narrow, constricting place that's strangling you, or even the place of bitterness that is Mara, where the Israelites find themselves right after they cross the Sea of Reeds. And what I talk about in the book is the idea that Mara, bitterness, can be your greatest Morah, your greatest teacher, if you let it, if you explore it. Not when you're in the thick of the trauma that you might be experiencing, the bitterness that you might be experiencing, but when you take a step back and you're a little bit removed and you reflect back on those difficult moments, you begin to see them as life's greatest teachers. Not an easy thing to absorb, but definitely a very real thing that I think each and every one of us finds ourselves in that particular place.
No, look, the fear factor also, on that portion of Shalach Lecha and the spies, there's this the fear of trusting one's instincts. Caleb and Joshua, they kind of got it, but they were voted down. We have a fear of a lot of us of trusting our own life, especially as we get older. We've lived life. We kind of know how things should work or do work. And yet you allude to this, I think, at least when I read it, a section on what you call SQ, a spiritual quotient, spiritual intelligence, which which comes up all the time in our Jewish sacred aging class, all the time, a sense of whether we're living in a time of spiritual deficit, which I think we are. Just walk me through what you meant by that SQ, that spiritual intelligence or spiritual quotient.
Yeah. So we all know about IQ, your intelligence for logic, and we all know about EQ, a concept that was popularized in the 90s, emotional intelligence. But SQ is something that's a little bit different. I describe it as the ability to tune into the divine frequency of the world. And that is to be able to see the blessing in places that are seemingly ordinary for other people, but also to be able to tune into this divine voice that I think is sometimes calling to us. Not an easy thing to do, but some of us, and I'm not saying that God speaks to me, but I do have moments where I just look around and I feel utterly blessed. I feel utterly in this place where I feel like I can hear a whisper of God's voice.
Mm-hmm.
Not that like I'm talking with God, but that I feel divine presence. To be in tune with that is something that I think requires this SQ, this ability to tune into a frequency that you didn't know was there.
We don't teach this enough, do we?
No, I mean, I actually describe in the book one of the places where you can best go to find it. I call it the midbar, the wilderness, which I'm not the first person to describe. The midbar is the sacred place, this place of emptiness, but actually a place where it's empty so that you are better able to tune into that frequency because there's less noise, there's less distraction around you. But when you actually are able to tune into that frequency, I think you know. And I've met many people who just have an aptitude for it, where you can look at them and they just see the world a little bit differently. And I think in our world of cynicism that we currently live in, it might sound a little bit nutty, but for me, it's really real. And when I see people who exhibit this kind of intelligence, this kind of perception of the world, I mean, those are the people I want to be hanging around because they just exude something about them that I want to hang on to because it's fun to be able to see the world the way that they do.
Well, you write about this idea of fear, like you just talked about, and people. I'm sure you've seen this in your work. There are people who are afraid to really open themselves up. You write, speaking of that midbar thing, of this kenosis.
Yeah.
And you have the midbar Rabbah, a midrash quote, but it really is what you're talking about. From what I understanding, it is the saying. And I've talked to people who do this. I said, where do you go to feel this? That, Heschel's radical amazement, and they'll say, I need to go to the mountains, or I need to stand by the ocean and or look at the stars and understand how the speck of dust that I am and what does that mean? So this is this kenosis thing, right? This sort of like emptying of oneself.
I stole the term from this author, Scott Peck, who wrote this book, Golf in the Spirit. That's not his most famous book, but in Golf in the Spirit, he says, kenosis is the process of emptying the self of the self in order to make room for the new and the other. Such a great concept. And the Bamidbar Rabbah quote that I think you're referencing is, in order to receive wisdom and Torah, you have to make yourself empty like Hefker Kamidbar, empty like the wilderness. I think that's very much this process of not becoming simply empty in a negative way, but becoming empty so that we are able to receive what's around us. I mean, I do it largely through meditation. I find a spot where nobody's around. I'm by the beach, so I go to the beach. I sit in the sand or I sit on a bench and I just close my eyes and listen to the waves and try to empty my mind, empty my body. And it's not an emptiness of nothingness. It's an emptiness in order to make room for something that I didn't expect to experience and to bring something new, something holy, something blessed into my life, something that I probably didn't recognize previously.
How do you want this book to be used?
I think a number of different people are going to find meaning in this book. At the end of every chapter, I include questions for discussion. That's very much because I do want synagogues, by the way, even churches. I'm speaking at a church next week, and I do want groups that are serious about text study to be able to use the book and relate it to discussion. By the way, the discussion questions are all about how you relate it to your life, so that it's not text to text, it's text to life. That's the most important thing for me. And so I do want people to be able to use it as a discussion, not necessarily to understand the text better, but to be able to understand themselves better. So I see it in that context. I also see it for spiritual seekers in general, people who are really interested in being able to understand why the Torah or why the Bible is relevant in their lives, so that they can go beyond any kind of literal meaning of the text or contextual historical reading of the text, and be able to see a deeply spiritual facet of the text that they might not have known was actually there. So there are a lot of different readers who I think are going to find meaning in this text. I did a talk at a library the other day, and a lot of people showed up who I didn't expect. People who grew up Jewish or grew up Christian or lapsed in their life and have been thinking lately, I need a little bit of something in my life that I lost, that I maybe didn't find, but I got a hint of, but it wasn't profound enough. People who are thinking about reconnecting to spirituality or religion, I think this book is a great road in for them.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We're living in a time where I think people maybe are even afraid to articulate exactly what you're talking about, especially younger people who, because of the world around them is so convoluted and without roots, that they're looking for something to believe in, even if I can disagree with it. But it is a moral foundation, a foundation that I can build something on, as opposed to do whatever you want to do. And as long as you make it you happy, it's okay. And if I was preaching on the holidays, I think one of my sermons would actually be, it's time to really reconnect with the basics of our tradition. And this is why I think you'll find resonance in the church community, in the non-Jewish community, because I think they're dealing with the same thing.
Yeah. There's an article recently, either in the Times or the Wall Street Journal, about the resurgence of religion.
Well, yeah, so there's been Pew studies on it in the last year. This is a very hot topic all of a sudden.
But it's going to be something specific. It's not going to be the organized religion of going to church or synagogue every Saturday or Sunday.
This is what, editorially speaking, this is what the denominational leadership has yet to figure out. They don't need to go into the building, but they need to sit with other groups, other like-minded people, and talk about what's going on and have something to base it on. And this is why text, as you know, as the text is the most profound teaching tool that has ever been created, because it's, as you do, it speaks to us where we are. Before we run out of time, I got to ask you about the epilogue. I'm reading through this, and all of a sudden I get to the epilogue, and you basically say, well, I could have ended it last chapter, but there's so much stuff going on. I got to write this. Yeah. You have this great quote, the end of the book on the epilogue, which is dealing with Israel and mishigas that's going on with anti-Semitism and the fracturing of the American Jewish community around Israel. Quote, you write, the Jewish people's connection to the land of Israel transcends the physical borders and soil. It is a symbiosis of memory, covenant, and future. That is a great line. That's for your t-shirt. Now translate that into New Jerseyan. It is a great line. What did you mean by that?
You cannot extricate Israel from landedness, as I call it. And that's because Israel is so ingrained in Jewish consciousness and so ingrained in our history that this method of really understanding metaphysical geography doesn't always work with Israel, because it's something else. It's something that's significantly more profound in Jewish life and Jewish history, Jewish culture, and Jewish theology. I'll note that pretty much every place that's mentioned in the book takes place outside the land of Israel. And that's because most of the Bible actually takes place outside the land of Israel. If you're actually looking at it and trying to figure out how much of the Bible actually takes place in the land, or even how much of the Torah takes place in the land, it's actually only a fraction of it, which is crazy when you think about it. But we've been through these periods of exile. We've been through these periods of wandering or being in Egypt. However, Israel has always been this central pillar to Jewish life. You cannot divorce the Jewish experience from Israel. It's that central. And I needed to write that after October 7th when I was writing the book, just because I didn't want anyone to pick up the book and say, look, Israel isn't that actually physically important to the Jews. They can go live there metaphysically. And no, you can't.
The book is Where Are You? Finding Yourself in the Bible. Josh Franklin is the author. I recommend this. This is a synagogue book club. Easily translates. It's an easy read. In other words, you do not need a PhD in rabbinics or Hebrew to get through this. Is written for the people in the pew and very lovely. So thank you much for this. Good luck in your next chapter.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to connecting in person soon.
No, we'll see you on PGA, and you're going to have a great adventure. Believe me. And the rabbinate there is very different than back east.
I'm sure.
Up north. Believe me. Thank you, Josh. Continued success. Haslachad. Toda rabah. All of you, thank you very, very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Again, if you'd like to make a comment or connect, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Please visit the website, jewishsacredaging.com. You'll find there, if you'd like to support our work, a very conveniently located donate button. And if you just follow the prompts, if you'd like to become a sponsor of some of these podcasts, please, again, just feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the broadcast arm of Lubetkin Media in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a big shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. To all of you, until we meet again, take care of yourself, hug somebody, most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom and Todah.